As we've mentioned, Bob Mueller's prosecutors rested their case against Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort. A conviction could put him in jail potentially for the rest of his life. Now, the defense is expected to be brief. Manafort himself expected to opt out of taking the stand. Closing arguments could come as soon as tomorrow. Now, defendants and their lawyers have many reasons, of course, for deciding whether or not to take the stand. We've seen Manafort choke up in the hot seat in the past, testifying before Congress about a public housing scandal in 1989 and admitting what he did amounted to influence peddling.
The technical term for what we do and what law firms, associations, and professional groups do is lobbying. For purposes of today, I will admit that in a narrow sense, some people might term it influence peddling.
That didn't seem to go over well with everyone. Manafort then went on to dodge some of the chairman's questions, and at times he appeared rattled.
It had a housing officer. It had a mayor.
It didn't have a housing authority, though, sir, so we couldn't go and sit and we went to the appropriate housing authority as we understood it.
I am asking you a different question, Mr. Manafort.
But I'm getting to that.
No, I'm asking you a very simple question. I'm asking you to address the question I'm asking you. I'm enormously patient and courteous, but I expect the courtesy of a response to the questions I ask.
I'm joined now by Gene Rossi, a former prosecutor in the Justice Department's Tax Division, for 2 decades a federal prosecutor in that same Eastern District of Virginia, arguing before Judge Ellis over 500 total times. And you were inside the courtroom last week. It is great to have you at the table.
Thank you very much.
You have a lot of experience here.
Yes.
Big picture.
Yeah.
What is the severity of the case that prosecutors have been able to put forward against Manafort now that they've rested? And what impact do you think it's having on this now quite well-known Judge Ellis, who you've been before?
Well, let me talk about Judge Ellis briefly. For 20 years, I had 7 trials in front of him, and I appeared over 500 times. He's demanding. He's diligent. He's brilliant. He doesn't use a velvet hammer. He uses a sledgehammer with nails. And I am covered with scars and wounds from Judge Ellis over those 20 years. You have to roll with it. Now let's talk about the amount of evidence that has been presented. In every criminal tax case, you got to look at greed, lies, and manipulation. And in this case, the greed is enormous, 16 million not declared. The number of lies is too many to count. The manipulation of his tax preparers and bank officials is also enormous. If I had to bet money, and I don't have a lot of money, Paul Manafort will be found guilty of 5 counts of filing a false tax return. He probably will be found guilty of several counts of bank fraud, plus the foreign bank account requirement. Do I think he has a chance of a hung jury? Maybe. I don't know what they're going to put on for evidence tomorrow, but I do know this. If they put Paul Manafort on the stand, they are crazy. And those attorneys who are representing Paul Manafort are some of the best of the best. They're from the Tax Division and Department of Justice. I'm familiar with all 3. They've been doing a great job, but they don't need to put Paul Manafort on the stand.
As you know from your extensive trial advocacy, the 2 things you're saying bump together, because it is only in a situation where a defendant is very worried about getting convicted that they might need the Hail Mary of going on the stand, because the burden, of course, sits with those prosecutors, the chair you used to sit in.
Yes.
As to whether Paul Manafort would help himself or not, he does have a law degree. He does see himself as a master strategist. But playing a little more from what we showed in the intro, there are a lot of reasons to think he doesn't come off that well on the stand. Take a look again in that grilling.
Okay.
Doesn't that seem to you improper?
We did not think that was improper. We understood.
Do you now? You think that's, I mean, here's, sorry.
See, the point,
The public, no, I want you to answer the questions. That seems to me improper.
But I guess the point that is getting lost in the process here is that there was, the fact that the program had been funded didn't mean that our project
No,
was
it
going
is
to be
not
funded.
getting lost, Mr. Manafort, but we are very clear about it. No, let me ask you.
We felt that risk.
Had you, yeah, it is a great risk.
Can you get away with those kind of answers in front of Judge Ellis?
Absolutely not. And if Paul Manafort acted like that in front of Judge Ellis is prone to interrupt a witness, prone to interrupt the prosecutor and the defense. I would guarantee you that Judge Ellis would interrupt and conduct his own cross-examination. I have seen it in my 7 trials.
And before we go, I want to ask you, is there anything you've seen in this case that suggests that Mueller is close to being done or far from being done or looking at other things?
There are 3 what I call red flags and loud gongs that are coming out in the last few days. The first red flag and loud gong that points towards this investigation is not done is that sidebar that was held involving Rick Gates. They tried to cross-examine. They had a sidebar. It was about the Trump campaign. That was a long sidebar. That sidebar was put under seal. That's a red flag because Rick Gates worked for the convention. He worked for the campaign. He worked for the transition committee. And he also worked a little bit for Trump's organization. The other red flag is something from Friday, August 10th, page 2045 of the transcript. There's a sidebar about a conspirator statement from Stephen Koch of the Federal Savings Bank. And in that sidebar, Mr. Andrews said that Mr. Koch is facing other criminal liability. That suggests to me that Stephen Koch, who was in a high-level advisory economic position and was working with the transition and the inauguration committee, he may, one, have been conspiring with Manafort to do bad things, public corruption, or without Manafort, he was doing something involving public corruption. This is not over. Absolutely. The third red flag is this. George Papadopoulos at 10:23 this morning, a protective order was filed for his sentencing in September. That says to me there's a possibility that the information at that sentencing may involve a lot of cooperation involving Russia. Possibly.
Right.
It's not over.
You're talking about whether Gates is testifying anywhere else regarding the Trump organization,
Yes.
whether there's other criminal liability, and what exactly Papadopoulos has put up, why it needs to be under seal, which is interesting to say the least. Gene Rossi, thanks for coming by the
thank you,
beat.
sir.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.